So today we're looking at how to critically analyze literature, dig deeper through close reading of text. So what is critical analysis? Well, analysis is basically taking something apart in order to understand it better by considering its component parts separately as well as together. Looking at all the different parts of something and considering those parts all individually. Now, the definition of critical, as is being used in critically analyzing literature, is expressing or involving an analysis of the merits and faults of a work of literature, music, or art. Synonyms for this word include evaluative, analytical, interpretive, expository, explanatory. Notice it's not critical as in, I'm very critical of you, like I'm trying to find out what's wrong with you. Critical analysis of literature is not looking for what's wrong with the piece of literature. It's just looking closely at each different aspect of it. So considering those definitions, a critical analysis explains a work of fiction, poetry, or drama. That's the meaning of the kind of literature we're looking at when we're critically analyzing literature. By means of interpretations, the goal of a literary analysis, which is a paper you might have to write or a talk you might have to give, is to broaden and deepen your understanding of that work of literature, not just to find out what's wrong with it or what's right with it, but what are all the different aspects that can be considered about any piece of literature, and how does that apply to the particular piece of literature that you're looking at. So we're going to consider each of these components separately, but basically when you're critically analyzing a piece of literature, you are examining its structure, the archetypes, any figurative language that occurs and reoccurs throughout the piece, the tone, the diction of the author, any symbolism that there might be, and influences on the author in his or her writing of the piece to begin with. Now, structure includes these three elements: point of view, organization of the text as a whole, and the elements of plot. A story can be told from multiple points of view, and we see this quite often in one chapter is told by one character, the next chapter is told by another character. That's multiple points of view. A story can also be told in first person. That's where the narrator goes ahead and includes himself in the story. It might even be a character in the story. He uses words like I, or we, or us, or me when he is narrating the story. A story could also be told in second person point of view, and that's where the author is speaking directly to the reader saying, you must understand this. Or a story could be told in third person narration. This is where the narrator is probably not a character in the story, but is just like an overarching narrator. An omniscient narrator knows all the thoughts of all the characters. A limited narrator either doesn't know any of the thoughts of any of the characters. This limited narrator is just reporting on what is said and what is done. Or it could be a limited narrator who knows the thoughts maybe of the main character, but not of any of the other characters. There are different ways that plots are organized. Some plots are linear. They're chronological. They start at one place and they end at another place in the future from where it started. There are also non-linear plot structures where you might have flashbacks, or you might have glimpses into the future. It's told in a non-linear way, not chronological. You also have circular plots. That's basically where the story ends up at the same place that it started. And you can also read stories with parallel plots. That's where there's two main plots basically happening at the same time. Sometimes those plots interact with each other. Sometimes they're just parallel plots, two stories happening at the same time, and there's really not a lot of interaction between the two plots. So a linear plot would start with the exposition, go on to rising action, have a climax, falling action, and a resolution. The series of events that happen are in chronological order. On the other hand, a non-linear story, even though it has characters and events just like a linear plot would have, a non-linear story jumps around. Maybe it doesn't start at the beginning. Maybe it starts somewhere in the middle or near the end of the story, and flashbacks are used to fill the reader in on the rest of the story. I think particularly of the story Holes by Louis Sachar. The Stanley Yelnats story is in the present, but it's constantly going back in the past and telling the history of how the Holes got there in the first place. Now, the hero's journey is an example of a circular plot, and you can just look around the circle here. The hero starts with his call to adventure, their supernatural aid, and so on, transformation, atonement, then the return, and then we're back to the hero at square one. He's probably changed, but he's ready perhaps for another call to adventure. My favorite example of parallel plots comes from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. There's one plot line that runs for the royalty, Theseus, Lysander, Hermia, Demetrius, Helena, Hippolyta, and Aegeus. And then there's another plot line that's running with the fairies and with the players who actually put on the acting troupe. So these plots are all happening simultaneously, but the characters don't always interact with each other. Sometimes they do, but each of these groups of people has their own plot line, their own rising action, their own climax, and their own resolution. But it's all happening in one story.